Could come to order, and the Finance Committee is continuing its study on Bill C-86, a second act to implement certain provisions of the budget tabled in Parliament on February 27th, 2018, and other measures. So I would welcome the witnesses here. Just for members' information, the clerk will pass out a budget, and we will deal with that later in the meeting. It's so people can look over it before we have a discussion on it, and it really relates. It's a budget that relates to this study and paying some witnesses' expenses who had to come some distance. So first up as a witness, we'll go to Mr. Hines, President and Chief Executive Officer of Fedco Incorporated. Go ahead, Mr. Hines. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, committee members. It's always a thrill for me to be here and appear in front of any committee. I studied politics many years ago and am a nonpartisan political junkie. Spend way too much time watching CNN and related media. I am the President and CEO of Fedco. Fedco stands for Federally Regulated Employers, Transportation and Communications. We are all federally regulated firms in transportation and communications sectors. We've existed as an organization for over 30 years. We're generally large employers in the federal sector, encompassing over 500,000 employees within the sector. Fedco members are household names to many of you: Air Canada, Bell, CN, CP, FedEx, UPS, WestJet, TELUS, to name just a few. So today, in my limited time with you, I'm going to spend a couple of minutes on two key issues within this bill: Division 14 around the Pay Equity Act and Division 15 around the Canada Labour Code. So I'm not going to comment clause by clause on provisions within the bill. The time in front of me today doesn't permit me to do that, nor did the time before in terms of reviewing the bill allow me to do that either. But I just want to talk really about four key messages in terms of our messaging to you today. The first is around, and I think this has been discussed at your committee, is around the use of omnibus budget bills. So here we are going to be equal opportunity criticizers. This is an issue on which we were critical of the previous government, and we will raise it again today. This bill is nearly 900 pages long, and it includes enormous diversity. To review it in 1 week and provide any sort of meaningful feedback to you is difficult. So we're looking specifically at two critical issues that affect our members. Both have been the result of consultation efforts that the government has undertaken. But at this point, I'd say this feels a little bit rushed. So we've gotten to this point where legislation has been introduced, and we are very quickly going to go through this bill, and let's be real, it's a budget bill, so it's likely to pass with only limited amendments. So, and the other thing, of course, is, I think has been pointed out, the modern labour standards piece in this bill around Part 3 was not specifically referenced in Budget 2018, so it is likely inappropriate in this space. It would have been our preference if both of these bills were standalone pieces of legislation. The government has committed a lot of energy around pay equity and around Part 3 of the Code. We've been engaged with them quite excessively with our counterparts in the labour movement, and it certainly would have been our preference to see these introduced as separate pieces of legislation. My second point is really around business cost. So our concern in this bill is that there are some indications that due consideration is not being given to business cost, and I raise this as a broader issue to the government as a whole. We've seen a lot of major workplace-related changes over the past 3 years, and I'll give you just some examples for which there are major cost implications for the employer community. Paid personal leave, family responsibility leave, expanded vacation leave, caregiver leave, Indigenous practices leave, leave for victims of domestic violence, medical leave, changes to the EI program, accessibility legislation, flexible work arrangements, pay equity, termination compensation, elimination of wait periods for certain compensatory benefits, and we're now starting to talk about a new statutory holiday. All of these have major cost implications. On an individual basis, I think it's quite rational to look at them and logically conclude that they are reasonable. But there's a cumulative effect to a number of these changes that is having a real major effect on the business community. So while as a government or as we're having a national dialogue on issues like business investment, workplace productivity, and economic competitiveness, that's tough when we're simultaneously driving up the cost of doing business. To us, that seems like a contradiction, and we think it would be reasonable that business costs would be factored into any of these discussions. Okay, so specifically on the bill in front of us today, I have some comments on both the Pay Equity Act and on the changes to the Canada Labour Code. So on the pay equity provisions, I want to be very clear, and I hope there is no misunderstanding between us today. Our organization, FETCO, is very supportive of the concept of pay equity. That is, equal pay for work of equal value. We believe closing the wage gap is of critical importance. It's the right thing to do. It makes business sense. The concern that we've been raising for the 2 years that we've been having this discussion, specific to this bill, is around the methodology. Now, I recognize this ship has likely sailed since it is now contained in the bill. But we have been concerned that a proactive approach to pay equity may not be the best approach to root out wage discrimination where it does exist. Government has clearly committed to it, and our concern, which we have raised repeatedly, is that this may be a costly and potentially overly bureaucratic solution that may not close the wage gap. And I reflect back to the Special Committee on Pay Equity. I presented on behalf of employers at that table. And while I was presenting, some representatives from Statistics Canada presented shortly before me, and they indicated some data which I thought was particularly useful. They indicated that we have a wage gap. When they looked at the sectors of Ontario, Quebec, and the federal sector, they indicated that there is a wage gap in Canada, and I think we all agree that that's a problem. They also indicated that the wage gap is narrowing. Now, that's a good thing, but it's not narrowing at a fast enough rate. What is most interesting about the data that StatsCan presented was the wage rates in the Ontario, the Quebec, and the federal models was essentially narrowing at the same rate. So the concern that we brought forward was, while we recognize the current approach we use, the complaints-based model, is not working as effectively as it could be, the question we raised is, why would we throw it all out and replace it with something that isn't proving to be any more effective than the current model that we're using? Happy to talk specifics about the bill if you have questions later. The second thing I'll talk about, the last thing I'll talk about, is the changes to Part 3 of the Canada Labour Code. So the fundamental issue that we've had throughout this process as it relates to Part 3 of the Code and the minimum labour standards that exist therein is that we think the government has largely applied a provincial lens to the federal sector, and they're really not the same. So the point we've made is that in some cases we're solving a problem that actually doesn't exist. The government speaks a lot about precarious and vulnerable workers, and while we do recognize that that issue does exist in the country, it's largely an issue that exists within provincially regulated sectors. In fact, the government's own data indicates this. The government's own data in its discussion paper leading up to this, these changes to Part 3 of the Code indicate that the vast majority of jobs in the federal sector are permanent, full-time, unionized jobs with full pensions and benefits. And many exist in the context of a mature collective bargaining system. So, C-86 introduced a series of changes to the code that are going to raise the standards. The challenges that this presents to us as large employers is that it will create a couple of key challenges. We think it's going to create conflicts in collective agreements where similar provisions already exist and what might happen when that conflict emerges. And secondly, we are worried about the inflationary pressure that elevating labour standards over here for what is a small group of employees may have over here for the bulk of the federal sector. I'll leave it at that. Happy to take your questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Turning to the Canadian Alliance of Student Associations, Mr. Brown, Chair.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président, honorable membres.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee.
Of the Algonquin and Anishinaabeg people, where we have the privilege of gathering today. My name is Adam Brown. I'm the chair of the Canadian Alliance of Student Associations, or CASA. I'm also the Vice President External of the University of Alberta Students' Union and a fourth-year student completing a business degree majoring in business economics and law. CASA is a non-partisan, not-for-profit organization that represents roughly 350,000 students at colleges, universities, and polytechnics across the country. Through a formal partnership with the Union Étudiants Québec, we are a trusted national student voice. We advocate for a post-secondary system that is accessible, affordable, innovative, and of the highest quality. Today, I will be speaking to two important aspects of this bill. The first relates to the Copyright Act and its impact on the quality of education here in Canada, and the second relates to education as a missing component of the government's poverty reduction strategy. These are two key elements that will significantly impact the quality and accessibility of student post-secondary experiences. Bill C-86 Part 4 amends part of the Copyright Act relating to the Copyright Board by improving the timelines and clarity of its proceedings and decision-making process. Students are pleased to see this, as CASA highlighted this as an issue in its Copyright Act review submission to the Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology earlier this year. In fact, students are directly impacted by the decisions of the Copyright Board, specifically when it comes to fees associated with copyrighted materials. Post-secondary institutions will either pass on the costs of copyrighted works onto students through increasing ancillary fees, or they will pay out of their operating budgets, which will affect the quality of the education being given. Despite the fact that the Copyright Board's decisions directly impact the accessibility and affordability of education, students are often left in the dark about the fees that are levied on them. Tuition is only one piece of post-secondary costs that students are expected to cover, and students will continue to struggle with unpredictable education costs if these high ancillary fees, such as those coming from copyright costs or the high costs of textbooks, remain. While CASA is pleased to see reforms to the Copyright Board, the question is still up in the air as to whether the existing statutory protection of education as a component of fair dealing will remain following the Copyright Act review. Fair dealing for the purposes of education specifically is a component that helps Canada offer an accessible and high-quality post-secondary education system by not subjecting information and knowledge to unreasonable restrictions. The way it accomplishes this is twofold. Firstly, fair dealing for educational purposes ensures that students can access a variety of quality learning materials with varying perspectives throughout their studies. For example, I've taken a few classes where professors use a variety of text, audio, and visual materials from different sources that do enhance the quality from diverse perspectives. Secondly, fair dealing for educational purposes keeps in mind the financial realities of students. As you're likely aware, students already face significant costs to their education, where the average undergraduate student with loans in Canada graduates with approximately $27,000 in student debt. Without fair dealing, students would lose because they would face overly burdensome processes and fees to access integral education materials. Faculty would lose as they're not able to provide or to have the same freedom to provide their students with affordable and diverse learning materials. Industries would lose because the incoming talent would lack exposure to a diversity of ideas throughout their learning. And finally, Canadian post-secondary institutions would lose to their foreign competitors who are making larger strides when it comes to providing their students with affordable and accessible education materials. Content creators are important. As a matter of fact, many of us students will go on to become those content creators. However, unnecessarily restricting students' access to learning materials is not a good way to protect those materials. CASA welcomes Copyright Board reforms, but calls upon all members of Parliament to do what they can to protect education as a component of fair dealing in the Copyright Act. To move to my second point, we're pleased to see the inclusion of the Poverty Reduction Act in Bill C-86. CASA believes that post-secondary education is an important tool to reducing poverty in Canada. Earlier this year, we also submitted recommendations to the government's poverty reduction consultation, and in this submission, students suggested ways to increase the usage of the Canada Learning Bond to help families in need save for their children's education. The government currently supports low-income families.
To slow down a little, they're having a little difficulty in the booth keeping up.
Sure, thank you. The government currently supports low-income families by providing Canada Learning Bonds, contributing up to $2,000 to a child's registered education savings plan, while the bond provides much-needed support to aspiring students from financially disadvantaged backgrounds. Sadly, only 31% of eligible families access the benefit. In Ontario, RESP registrations are now linked with online birth registration to ease the process of accessing this Canada Learning Bond. This is a step in the right direction to making the bond more accessible to families. CASA strongly encourages the Government of Canada to begin working with other provinces to increase the uptake of the Canada Learning Bond, as well as the number of young Canadians who are able to access post-secondary education in the future. Nous apprécions l'invitation à comparaître devant le comité.
We appreciate this opportunity to appear before the committee to discuss student concerns about the Copyright Act and other aspects of Bill C-86. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Turning then to Fair Canada, Mr. Allen, Executive Director, and Ms. Passmore, Director of Policy and Chief Operating Officer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to members of the committee. Fair Canada is a national charitable organization dedicated to putting financial consumers first. As a voice for financial consumers, Fair Canada is committed to advocating for stronger consumer protections and advancing investors' and financial consumers' rights. We are here today to speak briefly to some of the provisions in Division 10 of Bill C-86, the proposed Financial Consumer Protection Framework. As the members of this committee are well aware, banks hold a trusted position amongst Canadians because of the role they play in the savings, mortgages, loans, and investments of all Canadians. Our banks are in a unique position to have a significant impact on the long-term financial security of most Canadians. Today, financial products are complex, whether they're mortgages, investments, or even deposits, such as market-linked guaranteed investment certificates. This means that people go to the bank not just to conduct transactions, but with the expectation that they will be provided with advice that helps them meet their financial goals, and the banks market themselves and their services in this manner. Trust in banks is vital. It is important. As you're aware, in 2017, the CBC Go Public series on bank employees and the FCAC's Domestic Bank Sales Practices report, published earlier this spring, found numerous risks of mis-selling by banks of products and services to customers. The FCAC report showed that the retail banking culture is predominantly focused on selling products and services, and that consumers' interests were made secondary to those of the bank and their employees and contractors. The FCAC report demonstrated the need for strengthened consumer protection for Canadians in their bank dealings. In our June 9, 2017 letter to this committee, Fair Canada urged the adoption of a best interest standard for those engaged in providing financial advice to banking clients. Bill C-86 at section 627.06 introduces a requirement that banks establish and implement policies and procedures to ensure that products and services are, quote, appropriate for the person having regard to their circumstances, including their financial needs, close quote. Among our concern about this standard is that strict adherence to the proposed consumer protection provisions set out in Bill C-86, such as consent, no undue pressure or coercion, disclosure, will be seen as being sufficient to meet Bill C-86's appropriate requirement, while the product or service being sold may still not be in the consumer's best interest given its cost, net return, or other factors. A product or service may be appropriate, but it may still be suboptimal for the bank's customer. We are concerned that this appropriate standard will not advance consumer protection beyond that found by the CBC Go Public series and the FCAC report. As you may be aware, the securities sector has for more than 6 years been engaged in trying to strengthen the standard owed to clients beyond that of suitability, given that the suitability standard has not worked in the interests of consumers, clients of securities dealers. We do not want to spend several years determining what is appropriate for clients of banks when a clear standard of best interest could be introduced and work for the benefit of bank consumers. A second area of acute concern to Fair Canada is the existing consumer dispute resolution system for banking complaints. Simply put, the consumer dispute resolution system is flawed. Both the bank's internal dispute complaint handling systems as well as the external mechanisms. The FCAC report earlier this year found, quote, weaknesses in policies, procedures, and systems for handling complaints limit the ability of banks to adequately monitor, identify, and report complaints to management, boards, and the FCAC, close quote. Externally, as you're aware, the Bank Act regulatory oversight of external complaint bodies permits multiple external complaint bodies and results in one-sided competition. The banks are able to choose their referee of choice in order to handle customer complaints outside of the bank. In light of the above, Bill C-86's updating of the consumer-related provisions in the Bank Act is a critical first step in strengthening consumer protection for Canadians in dealing with their banks. We are optimistic that the government will continue to look at this area in light of the evidence produced by the CBC Go Public series and the content of the FCAC Domestic Retail Sales Practices Report, and that further reforms will be considered in the future. We do want to acknowledge a number of provisions in the existing.
Interrupt you, I'll have to, we're a little over your time already. I know you have some positive points to make about the bill and then some suggestions, so if you could kind of breeze through those pretty fast. I'll try and hold people to about 5 minutes, but go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Among the provisions we welcome is the establishment of a board committee to be responsible for consumer provision compliance. We're also very pleased to see that in the future the term internal ombudsman within the bank's internal bank handling systems will be prohibited. We're pleased to see greater transparency and accountability for external complaint bodies. The increase in the maximum fines for individuals and banks that contravene the consumer provisions is welcome, and the introduction of the whistleblower provisions is something that we're encouraged by. And I'll ask my colleague, Marianne Passmore, if she could just touch on a number of areas, identify a number of areas where we think the effectiveness could be improved.
Yeah, just quickly, with respect to the committee that's been created, we would like that to have a specific name, and its duties should include establishing policies, not only procedures, and ensuring that it reviews the implementation and compliance by the bank with the policies and procedures. With respect to complaint handling, we recommend that the banks should have to report total complaints received, not simply the number and nature of complaints that reach the most senior person, so that a fulsome understanding of the number of complaints that banks are receiving is made public and understood. We think that there should not be multiple steps that a bank makes a customer go through internally in order to address their complaint. There should be one process, not two. This has been the way that reforms have occurred in other leading jurisdictions, and time periods for internally handling complaints and for external bodies to handle complaints need to be clear, transparent, and objective. With respect to disclosure, we recommend that information about all charges or fees for a product or service should be in dollars and cents. We recommend that interest or returns need to be disclosed on an annual basis. With respect to the whistleblower policy, whistleblower provisions, which we see as a positive development, we strongly recommend that one office be created in order to receive and address whistleblower complaints and tips, not several bodies or organizations or entities as set out in the bill. We understand and agree that confidentiality is a critical component, and this should be extended to all individuals who come forward in good faith with information regarding possible wrongdoing. Other authorities or agencies should be subject to the same confidentiality provisions as those binding the office we believe should be created, and assurances of confidentiality should be obtained prior to sharing the confidential information to protect the identity of the whistleblower. Individuals should be able to come forward on an anonymous basis through legal counsel. And with respect to protection from reprisal, the office should have the ability and the legislative authority to bring an enforcement proceeding against a bank which retaliates against a whistleblower. It shouldn't just be that the whistleblower himself or herself, having lost their job, has a right to go pursue a litigation against a bank given the economic power disparity between an individual and the bank. So we recommend that there be a statutory right of action and that there be the ability of the office to bring a proceeding in order to enforce, to deter retaliatory actions. And finally, we recommend that agreements that limit an individual's right to report wrongdoing, whether an employment contract, non-disclosure agreement, or otherwise, should be deemed unlawful, so that individuals have the right to report wrongdoing and know that they have that right and it's not limited through contract. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present our views here today.
Thank you both. Turning to the Teamsters Canada, Mr. Benson and Mr. Lacoste. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for the invitation to appear before you on Bill C-86. My name is Phil Benson, lobbyist, Teamsters Canada, and with me is Stéphane Lacoste, General Counsel, Teamsters Canada. Teamsters Canada is the, is the largest private sector union representing workers in the federal jurisdiction, air, rail, road, bus, couriers, and more. I will be briefly addressing the proposed amendments to Part 3 of the Canada Labour Code, and Maitre Lacoste will discuss the Pay Equity Act. Teamsters Canada supports the Canadian Labour Congress presentation, and our written submission will follow. The proposed amendments to the Canada Labour Code were a long time coming, and we congratulate the government in moving forward. It is a step in the right direction. The most important change for Teamsters Canada is dealing with contract flipping. The new Section 189 will reduce the ability of companies presenting low bids on federal contracts based on reducing workers' benefits and entitlements under the Code, rather than bringing their managerial expertise to improve efficiencies. The proposed changes will not fully address the problems faced by unionized workers at airports, where contract flipping affects bargaining rights, compensation, and terms and conditions of employment. Teamsters Canada was very pleased when Minister Hadjiu announced the government will move forward with regulations under Part 1 of the Code to address this problem. Teamsters Canada will participate in all consultations on the regulations, and we encourage the government to move quickly in bringing them forward. Misclassification of employees by employers removes workers from the protection of the Code and also creates an uneven playing field for companies. The prohibition and reverse onus on employers provided by Section 167(1) will enhance existing legislation jurisprudence. This is an issue especially important in trucking, and Teamsters Canada welcomes the change. Section 173(01) provides some scheduling protection for non-union workers. It is not applicable to unionized workers, and even if it were, it would not be applicable to unionized workers falling under Transport Canada power to regulate hours of service in air, rail, and road. Fatigue is both a public and a health and safety issue for workers. The Transportation Safety Board placed fatigue in the transportation watch list. Teamster Canada demands that all workers in federal jurisdiction enjoy the full protection of the Canada Labour Code, and the Department of Labour fulfills its mandate to protect transportation workers. Transportation workers work long hours, and a major irritant is when a workday is extended, forcing them to work instead of attending family responsibilities, a common practice for couriers. Notwithstanding the limitations, Section 174(1), right to refuse overtime to carry out family responsibility, is progressive and shows the government understands the pressures placed on workers. Further evidence of this are the sections 181, see page 452 of the bill, dealing with breaks for medical reasons and nursing.
Bonjour, je traiterai quant à moi de...
Good morning. I'll be dealing with the Pay Equity Act. It was high time for Parliament to pass a proactive pay equity law. We welcome the government's desire to correct the discrimination suffered by women workers. We also agree with the position of the Canadian Labour Congress and make ours their representations. We must insist on 2 points, though. In a decision rendered on May 10th, Quebec Attorney General versus Alliance of Professional and Technical Personnel in Health and Social Services. Justice Abella, writing for a majority of the Supreme Court of Canada, recalled that the very premise underlying pay equity legislation is that women have suffered discrimination in the way they are compensated in the workforce. This observation is well reflected in Section 2 of the Act, but there's also a passage that has no place in a statement of principles such as this one. Teamsters Canada believes that the phrase, while accommodating the diverse needs of employers, is fundamentally at odds with the true objectives of the law and even contrary to the Canadian Charter. The bill must be amended to remove this passage. The bill must also take advantage of Quebec's experience with proactive pay equity legislation. And this has been in effect since 2001. We believe that it would be preferable for the bill to impose a similar obligation to that contained in Section 15 of the Quebec Act, namely, according to Quebec legislation, the employer, the certified association, or a member of a pay equity committee shall not, in establishing their pay equity plan, act in bad faith or in an arbitrary or discriminating manner, or be grossly negligent of the employees of the enterprise. We feel that that the government should include these points to avoid problems. These two amendments would make it possible to avoid endless litigation and achieve the true objective of the Pay Equity Act. Teamsters Canada will continue to monitor developments and work with the Minister to improve the situation of women workers throughout Canada. Thank you very much.
United Food and Commercial Workers Union Canada, Mr. Hennessy, Special Assistant to the National President. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair. On behalf of the United Food and Commercial Workers of Canada, I would like to say thank you to the committee and for the opportunity to share our perspective today. Before I put forward some of our thoughts, perhaps it might be good to say a few words about who we are. UFCW Canada is the voice of Canada's food workers. We are one of Canada's largest unions. We are proud and privileged to represent more than 250,000 hardworking people across Canada and 1.3 million workers in North America, as we are an international union. About 80% of our membership works in food-related sectors, and as like we like to say, you can find UFCW members everywhere in the food chain, from the field to the fork. Also, within our membership, we are very proud to include more than 10,000 members covered within the federal jurisdiction. They are G4S employees at airports, they are banks, they work at banks, in the transportation industry, grain milling, and workers at many of the Canadian Forces bases across the country. Today, I'm going to focus on the issues of pay equity and changes to the Canada Federal Labour Code. We were very pleased with the announcement of the Pay Equity Act. This legislation will go a long way in helping our members and their families directly. I mentioned that we have 255,000 members across the country, but what I may have not mentioned was that 52% of them are women. For many years, UFCW Canada has advocated for closing the gender wage gap and specifically pay equity at the federal level as one way to begin addressing closing the gender wage gap. We do, however, echo the concerns raised yesterday by the CLC, and we support their call for changes to the amendments to the bill. Very quickly, once again, they are within the Purpose Clause, Section 2. There's a qualifying phrase that says, while taking into account the diverse needs of employers, UFCW Canada thinks this should be deleted or amended. We recommend or prefer using some of the language in Ontario's Pay Equity Act as an example. The requirement of unanimity of employee groups on pay equity committees. We would like this to be amended to bring it more in line with the language in Quebec's Pay Equity Act. 3, retroactivity in pay equity maintenance. We simply echo the comments made yesterday by President Hassan Yousaf, asking for amendments which take into account the recent judgment on a similar provision in Quebec's legislation, which was struck down. With regards to the changes to the Federal Labour Code, UFCW Canada was very pleased with the announcements, as were our members who are covered by those changes. In particular, the domestic violence leave provision is an issue, and an issue for UFCW Canada that has long advocated for on behalf of our members. Our members will also benefit from the equal pay for equal value, vacation entitlements, just to name 2. Many of these changes will benefit women and newcomers to Canada, and many of whom become members of the United Food and Commercial Workers. However, we also can't leave without mentioning our concern with the announcement on contract flipping, an issue very important and familiar to our members in the security sector and the building services sectors. While we are happy with the protections for non-union workers, we do respectfully ask the government to go further by ensuring protections for all workers in the federal jurisdiction, including union members and their collective agreements. This would go a long way in achieving fairness for everyone and would provide stability and employment security for many of our members' families. That's going to conclude my remarks for today, and so I'd like to thank you again for your work and the opportunity to be here.
Thank you very much, Mark. Then turning to individuals, Mr. Hanna, Associate Professor and Chair of the Department of Political Science, University College at the University of Western Ontario. Welcome.
Thank you very much to the committee for inviting me to address you today. I am Associate Professor and Chair of the Department of Political Science at King's University College at the University of Western Ontario. My research centers on international political economy, trade, development, and global governance. Recently, I've been doing a lot of work on the global gender and trade agenda. I have 2 collaborative projects with researchers from the UK, through which we're exploring initiatives that are aimed at achieving gender equality and women's economic empowerment. We're trying to identify best practices and developing policy recommendations on how international organizations in countries like Canada can best pursue gender-sensitive and socially progressive policies. So in this vein, I'd like to focus my comments today to the committee on the gender dimensions of Bill C-86, and particularly as they're relevant to international trade. So I'll make 4 arguments to which I'll return one at a time. First, Canada is a leader on the gender and trade agenda, and many elements of the bill, the Gender-Based Accounting, the Pay Equity Act, and the establishment of a Department for Women and Gender Equality are reflective of Canada's progressive and gender-sensitive approach to trade. So at the same time, I'd like to strike both a congratulatory tone and also a cautionary tone with respect to the bill. While these elements can be characterized as auspicious, I think we're at risk of overpromising and underdelivering on the trade and gender agenda specifically. Third, a Pay Equity Act is meaningless for many if trade liberalization is pushing women into increasingly low pay and precarious work. And fourth, from a budgetary perspective, using trade as a lever for gender equality and women's economic empowerment will require more ambitious commitments on capacity building and knowledge transfer, both in Canada and abroad. So Canada's gender-sensitive trade policy is aimed at supporting women's economic empowerment, it's aimed at closing gaps in welfare distribution, and it's aimed at minimizing the adverse impacts of trade liberalization on vulnerable women. There's multiple such initiatives underway that we can discuss in the question period, but it's fair to say that Canada is at the very forefront of this agenda. In the February budget, as you well know, Canada committed to subjecting its free trade agreements to Gender-Based Analysis Plus, or GBA Plus, an assessment that takes into account gender and other intersectional identity characteristics. And this is very important because, as we know, the impacts of trade liberalization are gendered, especially in terms of employment and wages, but also in terms of job segregation and working conditions, in terms of consumption, and on the provisioning of public services. This also has to include a consideration of how these things have the potential to increase unpaid labor in the household. Although we know this, about the gendered nature of trade liberalization, it's only recently been acknowledged that we need to adopt an evidence-based approach to generating sex-disaggregated data and reliable methodological tools for measuring gender impact of existing and proposed trade deals. So I'll say again that I think the risk of overpromising and underdelivering on this agenda are quite real. So we're at the cusp. We're truly at the cusp of establishing best practice in the field. But conducting rigorous GBA Plus analysis is best described as ad hoc and aspirational at this time. It's never been applied to a free trade agreement before. That means that this is a really good opportunity for us. And while Canada is using GBA Plus to conduct an ex-ante assessment of its FTA with Mercosur, most experts, including the chief economist of Canada, acknowledge that we lack reliable and sufficiently granular data to fully assess the impact of proposed trade deals. This means that in the absence of well-established methodology and sex-disaggregated data, we're relying on anecdotal and voluntary reporting, mainly from businesses, but also from academics and non-governmental organizations, including women's rights organizations. So the items, the government's commitments to fund evidence-based policy on gender equality is absolutely crucial. So this is the celebratory tone, right? So that $6.7 million over 5 years to StatsCan to fund a Center for Diversity Inclusion Statistics is absolutely essential. That $5 million per year to the Department of Women and Gender Equality, absolutely crucial. $1.5 million over 5 years to fund coordination between the Department of Finance, Gender and StatsCan, essential. The priority of the Department of Women and Gender Equality and its new minister needs to be better coordination between all of these agencies. And further, if we're to make good on our claims about intersectionality in GBA+, then we need data on the impacts of trade agreements on other vulnerable groups in Canada, and including Indigenous populations. It's also notable that we've only committed to conducting GBA+ of new trade agreements. So this tells us nothing about the gendered impacts of the many trade agreements to which we already belong, many of which are named in this bill. The Pay Equity Act and the establishment of the Department for Women and Gender Equality are among the most exciting, progressive, and important dimensions of the bill. And considered in tandem with the Gender Budgeting Act, it has the potential to greatly improve the lives of many women. But there's a lot at stake if we fail to get the GBA+ analysis right in the field of trade, and this has direct implications for the Pay Equity Act. So I said before that pay equity will be meaningless if, by the same token, we're concluding trade deals that push women into jobs that are precarious and low pay, and/or that shift the burden of care work more squarely on their shoulders. Similarly, Canada's approach to negotiating investor protection in deals like CPTPP, in CETA, for example, may be considered socially regressive because of the dangers associated with regulatory chill. So we need to ensure that investor protections do not curtail government's duties to protect and promote women's rights or work at cross purposes with other elements of our gender equality agenda. So we could take a minimalist approach. We could take a do no harm approach. A minimalist approach is to conduct good GBA+ to simply ensure that new trade agreements do no harm, that they do not increase gender-based or other forms of inequality. This would mean conducting ex-ante GBA+ using sex-disaggregated data along 4 dimensions, in terms of employment and wages, in terms of consumption, in terms of access to public services, and its effects on entrepreneurship. It's worth noting that most assessments of gender-based assessments of free trade agreements focus only on the first category, employment and wages. I think Canada can do a lot better and focus on the impacts on those other 3 dimensions as well. A maximalist approach would have us using trade as a lever for gender equality. So this is a circumstance where we would conduct both ex-ante and ex-post assessments of free trade agreements along those 4 dimensions. So we look at how proposed free trade agreements would impact women and other vulnerable groups, and then we would take stock of how already existing free trade agreements have been affecting women and other vulnerable groups. It would involve introducing measures to mitigate the adverse gendered impacts of trade liberalization. This is where the buck stops in the bill. So we've committed to conducting assessments of the impacts of free trade agreements, but we're saying nothing about mitigating the adverse effects of trade liberalization on women and other vulnerable communities. So we need a proactive approach. We need an approach that would have us working with our trade partners and finding ways to use trade in a meaningful way as a lever for gender equality, and creating new opportunities, not only for women entrepreneurs, but for other women that are engaged in the Canadian economy. So from a budgetary perspective, Canada would be working at home and abroad to engage in capacity building and knowledge transfer to reduce barriers to women's economic empowerment and to reduce their precarity. So to conclude, I would say that we're saying all of the right words, and these words are reflected in C-86. We have promised to subject all new federal budget items to gender and diversity impact assessments, given that trade is a social justice issue and that trade policies affect women and other vulnerable groups differently and profoundly. This is a welcome move. But if we are to deliver on these words, then we have to have reliable, trade-related, sex-desegregated data. We need to take concrete measures minimizing the adverse impacts of trade on women and other vulnerable groups, and we need to identify and fund pathways for using trade as a lever both for sustainability and gender equality. And I think that successfully delivering on this agenda could really improve the lived experiences of women in Canada and abroad.
Thank you, Ms. Hanna. As an individual, last witness, Mr. Lee, Associate Professor, Sprout School of Business, Carleton University. Go ahead, Mr. Lee.
I thank the committee for inviting me to appear. I just note that I don't represent anyone because I don't consult to anyone or anything anywhere. I'm just merely a poor professor. Today, I will focus on only one issue in this mammoth budget implementation bill, and that's the federal deficit of the Government of Canada. I'm old enough to remember the previous time the federal government had a balanced budget in the early 70s, and the justification then was the same as today. Canada had a large, robust, and growing economy that could readily finance the deficit. And indeed, we did and do. This was the 70s, the boomers were young, there were millions of us, and the economy was growing incredibly rapidly. However, as our spending ran ahead of our revenues and government deficits started to grow and grow and grow, inflation crept into the economy and became embedded, or anchored as the governor would characterize it as, and the Bank of Canada and the Federal Reserve started to increase interest rates. Rates peaked at 20% when I was mortgage manager at BMO, one block from here, which is now the building owned by you people for your receptions, the Sir John A. Macdonald building. Nonetheless, due to the magic of compound interest, the monetary intervention, which it was, to embedded inflation of around 15%, while brutally effective at killing the metastasizing cancer of inflation, did not address the compounding, rapidly escalating federal debt in Canada, or the states for that matter. That required a second massive government intervention 15 years later, a fiscal intervention, the unprecedented and largest downsizing in Canadian history by the Chrétien administration in laying off 80,000 people. Both were essential responses to the emergence of deficits that were added to and compounded the national debt, that drove inflation upward and then caused negative blowback from the capital markets, bond markets, currency markets, and investment markets. The purpose of this very brief walk down memory lane is to remind parliamentarians that those who argue that federal deficits are of no concern because Canada is a very large modern economy with a printing press called the Bank of Canada to print money if necessary, do not fully recognize the danger of compound interest or sudden unexpected recessions requiring major new government stimulus, or the reaction of capital markets or currency markets or investment markets to governments that become heavily indebted. Andrew Coyne has developed these arguments more fully in an op-ed about 2 weeks ago. However, the strongest rebuttal to my arguments are provided by the response, yes, Professor Lee, you're correct about the 70s through the 90s, but that was then, this is now, and those conditions no longer pertain. This is absolutely correct. And I now turn to this. Indeed, the past 40 years or so were wonderful for most of us, with steadily increasing wages, increasing standard of living, increasing prosperity, increasing levels of education, improving health care. Life, at least for the boomers in Canada for the last 30, 40 years, has been a beach. But now we face dramatically different times than the 70s that are much more bleak and foreboding. The most obvious threat to Canada and the entire Western world is the aging crisis that the IMF has stated in writing will dwarf and greatly exceed the cost of the 2008 financial crisis by many magnitudes. Per the OECD, the dependency ratio in 1968 of 7 workers to 1 retiree will collapse to less than 2.5 workers to 1 retiree. Today, Florida has the largest average age population, 1 in 4 over 65. Within approximately 20 years, all of North America is going to look like Florida without the nice weather. The second related problem of the aging crisis, and this really affects all of you in this room, confirmed by numerous OECD, IMF, and scholarly studies, is that economic growth that generates the tax revenues that we spend, that Parliament spends, is going to decline significantly going forward, around 1.5% decline in GDP annually. This is going to reduce the tax revenues available to governments and your degrees of spending freedom. But it gets worse. As the PBO demonstrated in the Fiscal Sustainability Report of only 2 weeks ago, and this is a direct quote, current provincial government expenditures are not sustainable over the long run. In the not distant future, the numbers demonstrate, and I have predicted on CBC and elsewhere, that the Parliament and the Government of Canada will be called upon to bail out or assist the Government of Newfoundland and Labrador and/or the Government of New Brunswick. Per the latest Newfoundland and Labrador budget statement of this year, this government and its 500,000 residents now owe net debt $15 billion, and Muskrat Falls bills are not fully paid, or they haven't flowed in yet. By contrast, the City of Ottawa, and I know it's not a province, I recognize that, but we're all in Ottawa, and I just had the numbers at my fingertips. It's 1 million people, twice as many as Newfoundland and Labrador, owe $2.5 billion net debt, with about half of LRT already funded. But I'm not picking on Newfoundland and Labrador. As the PBO said, none of the current expenditures of any of the provinces are sustainable. And for those who object, don't you understand, provinces can't go bankrupt? I am not discussing bankruptcy, which is a legal concept. We are discussing solvency, which is an accounting concept. Can the province pay its bills as they become due? Puerto Rico today is insolvent. It is not bankrupt. Detroit was insolvent for many years before it finally became bankrupt. As I assume I'm just wrapping up now. As I assume that no parliamentarian will realistically refuse to bail out an insolvent province and its people, how will each of you respond to such a request if it means, and likely will, killing some of the federal projects you want financed? This means that we must confront the question, should we, can we, ought we continue to add roughly $20 billion a year after year to the national debt of Canada, which is reducing our degrees of future spending freedom, knowing, if we are going to be honest, that bailout demands from some provinces are on the near horizon and will be on your desk in the relatively near future, I predict within 5 years. In the words of John Donne, do not ask for whom the bell tolls, it is tolling for thee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Turning to 7-minute rounds, Mr. Fragascatis first. Go ahead.
It's tolling for all of us, Mr. Chair, but in any case, I'd like to begin with Professor Hanna. Thank you very much for being here and for your outstanding presentation. You mentioned, and I wrote down as you said it, the impacts of trade liberalization are gendered. I wondered if you could expand on that. I think it's a very critical point as we look forward to a progressive trade agenda and building upon the achievements of the past 2 years that we've seen with this government.
Thank you very much for the question, Peter, and thank you again to everyone for inviting me to join today. We have some large cross-country studies that look at the impact of trade liberalization over time on different sectors. So we can look at the impact of trade liberalization in the field of goods, and we have some pretty reliable data that tells us that there is a tendency to widen wage inequalities between men and women. We can look at the impacts of trade liberalization on trade and services, particularly where liberalization of services leads to a contraction in the provision of public services and the ways in which those changes are most felt by women operating in the household or working in the household. We also know that, like in some trade agreements, we have pretty solid carve-outs for public services. The free trade agreements negotiated by the European Union are pretty distinctive in this respect. But the ways in which trade and services agreements have been negotiated, for example, in TISA, to which Canada is a partner, threatens to eliminate those carve-outs, which would put some would say some public services at risk, which again the burdens would be felt most heavily by women. Any inclusion of things like standstill or ratchet clauses in trade and services agreements, again, the burdens would fall most heavily on women. In terms of investment protection. So I mentioned that we have to beware of things like regulatory chill. We have to acknowledge arguments that say that, for example, the way that Canada is negotiating an ISDS clauses in some of its trade agreements will have a downward regulatory effect. So what this means is that governments' hands may be tied in terms of regulating in areas ranging from public health and consumer laws to environmental and social protection. So even the United Nations has been talking about this. The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has acknowledged this chilling effect that investor protections might have. So, these are just a few of the examples of the ways in which trade agreements can adversely impact women.
You said also that trade ought to act as a lever for gender equality. I wrote that down as well, which I agree with you very strongly. And our government has sought to put that forward and indeed has acted on that in the various trade pursuits that we have seen since 2015. Some, unfortunately, certainly not on this side, but some, unfortunately, have characterized this as virtue signaling. What would you say to those that say that, using trade as a lever in such a way is virtue signaling?
Well, it's quite possible that it could turn out that way. I mean, we are very, very early days on this agenda. In many respects, this conversation is in front of the policy, which is partly why it's so exciting. When we look out into the world, there's lots of different gender and trade initiatives that we could look to, but let's think about Canada for a moment. So today I've talked mostly about, our commitment to looking at the impact assessment of trade agreements. But Canada has also been more proactive in thinking about, how can we integrate, say, positive discrimination in our free trade agreements in ways that would assist women-owned enterprises, for example, perhaps in procurement policies. So those are some things that Canada is thinking about.
But what about, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I only have 7 minutes, so, and we're halfway through. So virtue signaling in the sense that it's not even worth pursuing, that really the idea ought to be dollars and cents, making sure that, it's all about cold, hard economics, and the idea of gender equality being part of a trade agenda, say those and imply those that talk about virtue signaling, put that on the back burner and don't worry about those things. What is your view on that?
Okay, so this was conventional wisdom in the field of trade until 16 months ago, right? So, conventional wisdom is that trade is non-discriminatory by nature. That is the fundamental nugget at the heart of the multilateral trade system and all the, free trade agreements that we're negotiating, right? So, many economists would make that argument, right? But we do know that trade has gendered impacts, and we do know that women entrepreneurs and women-owned enterprises need a leg up in order to be competitive in the global economy. Those are two different sides of the equation, right? And so a lot of the initiatives that are underway have been focused on women's economic empowerment. That Canada is a signatory to the World Trade Organization Declaration on Women's Economic Empowerment. That Canada has a gender chapter in its agreements with Chile and with Israel, right? Let's be clear, these things are best endeavor, right? They're promissory at best, but they are signaling the importance of linking human rights to the regulation of global trade. How we deliver on these agendas is what really matters at this point, right? So if we treat it as window dressing and just say the words without following up with real policies that can, truly impact the lives of women, then I think those charges would be true. But I feel hopeful that Canada can be a leader on this agenda and will follow through in a way that is meaningful, not only for women, but other vulnerable groups.
Well, I think the sincerity is there and it's demonstrated and we're moving forward in the right direction, but your points are certainly well taken. I have about a minute left, I believe, and with that, I wanted to ask you a question on coordination. You talked about it, but I wonder if you could expand on the point that, if I take your point correctly, that is, which is to say that the new Minister for Women and Gender Equality ought to coordinate. But could you speak about how specifically they can coordinate with the Minister for International Development? Because I think that partnership will be absolutely essential in terms of advancing gender equality on the international stage.
That coordination is essential, certainly. Equally important is coordinating with the Minister for International Trade and Diversification, and with the Finance Minister, because all of this stuff needs to be funded. So there needs to be a really close collaboration between those people, but it's not Canada alone on this agenda too. I mean, there's a lot we can learn from our trade partners, and when I talk about the importance of developing this methodology, I don't think we should be doing it alone. I think we should be working with our partners in international organizations to standardize a gender-based assessment that can be applied to trade agreements around the world. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we had a lens that we could apply not only to the impacts in Canada, but also that our partners could also apply in their home countries using their data?
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Mr. Richards.
Good, thank you. Appreciated the presentations from all of you. Mr. Lee, you had made some comments, obviously, about the deficit and your concerns about that. I share those concerns. You focus mainly on the concerns you see as a result of situations in provinces and what that might mean for the federal government if there needs to be a bailout. But obviously, you know, the federal government has made some decisions that have put it in a deficit as well, even though, you know, just a few short years ago it was left with a surplus coming into office. And obviously we're in a time where, you know, globally the economy is, you know, in a pretty good spot. Just curious what your thoughts are on the situation that the federal government currently finds it's in terms of the deficit being, you know, somewhere in the neighborhood of about $20 billion in a relatively good time. And in your opinion, is there ever an excuse for a government during a time of, you know, non-recessionary period in the economy to be running deficits, especially ones of that magnitude?
Thank you. First, I'm not from that camp, and I think any reasonable person is that the government of Canada cannot afford a $20 billion deficit. Of course it can. There's just no question about it. It has an enormous fiscal capacity. The PBO has documented that. We don't need to read the PBO report. We just have to read the monetary policy reports, as I do every 6 months, that are published by the Bank of Canada. The numbers are laid out, or you read the IMF outlook on Canada or the OECD outlook, and these studies cross-corroborate each other. So it's not a question of can we afford it? Of course we can.
The question is should.
The question is ought we?
Yeah.
Should we? If you assume, as I do, and I don't think it's a big assumption, that resources are scarce, public resources, public revenues are scarce, they're not infinite, you have a finite amount of revenue, and so government, as Aaron Wadowski, the late great dean of public policy at Berkeley, said, you know, a government is about making choices, and budgets are about making choices. And right now, yes, I am very critical of pouring $20 billion into the economy. We're stimulating in this country. The government of Ontario has running a significant deficit for many years. I'm talking post-recession, post-2008-9. The Bank of Canada has had rates which is monetary stimulus at an unprecedented, historically unprecedented low levels, and the federal government's been pumping it in throughout that period. And so here we are pouring, essential to use metaphors, gasoline on a roaring fire. Well, I'm not a purist who says don't put gasoline on a fire to get it going, although it's probably not very environmentally responsible. I don't see the need once the economy, we're going flat out right now. The U.S. and Canada's economies are just doing gangbusters. So there's no justification, and this isn't some kind of ideology. This is straight out of John Maynard Keynes, the great liberal macroeconomist at Cambridge, and who made that argument. You go into deficit when times are bad, when the economy goes off the cliff, as we did in 2008-9, and you run up surpluses when the economy is doing strongly. So we did, and in past recessions, the 2008-9 we did, 90-91, back in 80-81, those were appropriate. I'm not a person who says government should never run up deficits. When they go into a recession, yes, but there's no justification right now, no academic, no scholarly, no theoretical or pragmatic justification for running significant deficits. And my other concern is we are reducing our degrees of freedom in the future because resources are finite. They're not infinite. If they're not infinite, then that's money we're spending that we're not going to have available down the road to spend on something else.
Right. So I guess a two-part sort of follow-up on that. First one being, obviously, you know, you mentioned the 2008-9 recession and you know, the fact that there was felt a need at the time to stimulate the economy, and that obviously meant deficits for that period of time. You know, of course, the government then made the efforts that were required to come out of that. But if you look at prior to that as well, you know, the government that was in power, obviously the government that I was later a part of, was, you know, obviously running surpluses and paying down debt in that period of time. Is that something that you advocate for, that during a good period of time we should be trying to pay down the debt? That's the first part. And the second part is, you know, when we're looking at the situation, you've mentioned good times, you know, running a deficit. Of course, there's many people who've talked about what that means when we do, and if and when we do experience another downturn or a recession. And I know that, for instance, a recent paper that the Fraser Institute put out indicated that if we saw a slowdown of like the 2000-2001 variety, we would see then we would run to deficits if the circumstances were the same of about almost $50 billion. And of course, if it was a 2008-2009 recession, then that would be even more serious in terms of the numbers of the deficit. And obviously, we're seeing the path that the government's on now, people saying that they wouldn't be able to balance the budget till 2045. So I guess what I'm asking there is that something we should really be concerned about as well, and why?
Just the
two parts there.
Yeah, there's a couple of 2 or 3 questions in there. I'm not. I mean, I know there are some people who think that deficits and national debt is bad. I simply don't subscribe to that. I think there's a very substantial body of economic theory that would argue against that. So it's not the idea that there is a national debt or a deficit. It's partly whether there's a need for it. Right now, there's no need for it. But to deal with your larger question, I mean, when you are not running up surpluses, again, it's not about paying off the deficit or getting, very ideological, if you will, about paying off the deficit or the debt. It's that you are reducing your degrees of freedom for the future. That's my biggest argument that I want to make to parliamentarians today. You may think that this is free of consequence, but it isn't. Because what we're doing is reducing our degrees of freedom in the future when we have to bail out, who knows, the next automobile company and the next recession. Just very quickly, this is the second longest recovery in economic history in Canada and the United States. So we are already on statistical borrowed time, if you will, before the next recession. And when it comes, we're going to have to stimulate, and it could be 2% of GDP, it might be 3% of GDP, but it's going to be very significant because there's an expectation that governments have to do something. And so then we're going to be looking at 20 billion deficits like they were nothing. I mean, we're going to be looking at probably 50 or 60 or 70 billion dollar deficits in the next recession. So again, and then along comes the problem with the maritime provinces that are the most challenged. And so we've got some crises down the road, and tax revenues are going to start to fall as the growth rates start to decline because the boomers are all heading off into the sunset. So we've got, the economy of today and the growth of today is not going to be there in 2 or 3 or 4 years. We are facing a structural transformation over the next 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, but we're spending like there's not going to be any changes occurring.
We'll have to end it there. Mr. Julian, 7 minutes, if you could.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thanks to all of our witnesses. As a number of you have indicated, Mr. Hines, in this panel, this budget bill is badly flawed and has been rushed through Parliament. We're given a few hours of witnesses, and we really appreciate you coming forward today. Witnesses have identified a whole variety of flaws. The government has given absolutely no indication that they will do anything other than a week next Tuesday bulldoze this through in a few hours. And the special handcuff legislation that they brought in means that anything that hasn't been amended is simply adopted full scale at the end of the day. And so it's a ridiculous approach to policy making. Mr. Hines, thank you for your comments. The Speaker has rebuked the Finance Minister for doing this. Certainly, Mr. Trudeau promised that he would act differently than Mr. Harper. This is twice as bad as anything Mr. Harper pulled. So we have to try to adjust these incredible flaws. And I'd like to start by asking Mr. Benson, Mr. Lacoste, and Mr. Hennessy, all speaking about pay equity. You raised very, very important issues about the flaws in the bill. And Mr. Lacoste, vous avez dit que ces deux modifications.
Mr. Lacoste, you said that these two amendments, the amendments that you propose, avoid interminable court cases or disputes. That's the main concern, that women are going to have to go back to court if this bill is adopted as is.
What happens if this government just rams through this legislation without making the essential changes that you and so many other witnesses have suggested?
Merci pour la question. Effectivement.
Thank you for your question. In our opinion, the changes that we're suggesting are essential to get some time, because what's going to happen, and we saw this with the Quebec legislation, there were a lot of court challenges. Now we can take advantage of the Quebec experience and avoid making the same errors. This applies to Clause 2. I ask that this part be withdrawn because if it remains, the very purpose of the clause, well, it's an interpretive tool for the whole piece of legislation, and it's contrary to the Constitution. I referred to the Justice Abella decision of the Supreme Court. The purpose of the bill is to restore equity. Employers have the right to be paid for female workers are entitled to receive the same pay as their male workers for the same work. But this will do the opposite. And this will create imbalance. This will create an imbalance. Perhaps some employers will not want to pay female workers the same amount. That will lead to court challenges. It'll go right up to the Supreme Court. I don't know how long it'll take, 8 or 10 years before there's a final decision that's rendered. And so I think, as my colleague pointed out, there's a whole issue of retroactivity. That's the same thing. We've had a Supreme Court decision on this last May that really made a decision about that. And it was decided that the Quebec legislation was anti-constitutional, contrary to the Canadian Charter of Rights, because it didn't allow for proactivity of payments. And this piece of legislation is doing exactly the same things. Then we will have to start the debate all over again at the federal level. So if a few changes are made, because if the changes aren't made, we're going to once again before the courts. We're talking about basic principles that should be found in the legislation. Thank you very much, Mr. Hennessy.
A duty to represent our members, and so if it goes through, just like Stefan mentioned, we would be back in the courts representing them and challenging it there. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. And the constitutionality of that clause has been challenged by a whole variety of witnesses. A government member said that opposition was incoherent, and I think what you're saying today is extremely coherent, and the government should be listening. I want to go to Mr. Hines now. You were very critical of this omnibus legislation, as the Speaker has been, and as so many of our witnesses have been. Is it possible, given the size and scope of this, to simply spend a few hours on amendments?
It's challenging. It certainly poses challenge to us. The two provisions on which we've come to speak today are they're major provisions in this bill, and they're the result of a consultation that predated the bill. So it would be more helpful, I think, if we could have the time to unpack some of this. As my colleagues have done, we will have some specific recommendations around clauses with which we have some discomfort. We will submit them to you in writing. We're still consulting within our own stakeholder community on that.
May I interrupt you on this? The clause deadline is just in a few days' time.
Yeah, so that's challenging.
The government is giving you no time at all, really. They have to be submitted by next Thursday.
Can I speak to the previous question, if I may?
Yes.
So,
very briefly.
The recommendations that have been put forward, to which you have acknowledged there has been pretty clear consensus, I would challenge some of them on behalf of the employer community. And again, we're still sort of socializing some of this, but the clause in Section 2...
I'm sorry, I'm running out of time, and I did have a question for Mr. Allen and Mr. Passmore, and so I will go on to them. You've raised concerns, acute concerns, about the flaws in this legislation. Are you able to present us with amendments in a few days' time? We really need them by the beginning of next week, given the government's bulldozer to try to push this through. I'll be presenting amendments on behalf of the opposition. How concerning is it that the government is refusing to heed the many voices wanting to address the flaws in this bill?
Well, we regard a number of the provisions in the bill as being improvements and moving forward. Our concern is banking is such a vital function that further improvements would benefit bank customers and consumers. And our organization is a lean organization, and we will do our best to contribute to the discussion and try to feed into the consideration of the bill. But obviously the limited time is a constraint.
33 seconds left.
Oh, okay.
Oh, here, excuse me. You are over 33 seconds. It's kind of like the difference between a surplus and a deficit.
Yes.
On to Mr. Fergus.
Vice-président, j'ai deux questions.
I have two questions for Mr. Brown and for the Teamsters. I'll begin with Mr. Brown. If you want to put in your earpiece. Can you hear me okay? Good. So thank you very much for your presentation. I'd like to thank everyone for coming here to present their very interesting testimony. Mr. Brown, you said that the Canadian Alliance of Student Associations had a particular point of view with respect to the equitable use of the law for education. You said that it was important that we keep the system defined by the Supreme Court back in 2012. Could you add to that, to the use of copyright?
It's important that students do have the affordability that is necessary to be able to afford quality materials in the classroom. It's a concept that is being implemented in some provinces more than others, but essentially the affordability for students to be able to save money on textbooks, but for professors as well to be able to access many diverse perspectives and resources to be able to present to students in their classes is crucial to the quality of learning in post-secondary institutions across the country. So I can go back to, I took a political science course on Aboriginal people and politics, for example, and that course was entirely based on papers and videos and different materials that were essentially pulled by my professor. I didn't have to pay for textbooks. It makes things much more affordable for students, but it is worth touching upon the quality of those materials as well. D'avoir des diverses perspectives.
Contain a variety of perspectives. It's good so that students can learn how to manage various opinions on a variety of topics. So I hope that answers your question. Yes, and what you're saying is that you're not against the idea of paying some money for copyright, but you're not saying that you're going to copy out works in their entirety. And this is all for educational purposes as well. So you say it's useful to maintain this exception. Yes, that's right. And it should be noted, it's not that industries are starting to lose a lot of money because of this exception. Post-secondary students spend more than $1 billion per year on purchasing educational materials. So there's a lot of economic transactions that are going to continue for educational purposes, but I'm just saying that this would be better for the students. It's more affordable, and sometimes the problem we see is that when institutions start investing more in materials, they put the expenses on the backs of the students. But there's no, students can't control that at all. So having some government assistance in that line is very, very important. Mr. Lacoste, thank you very much for your presentation. I appreciate the Teamsters' opinion. In your testimony this morning, you said basing is against the real objectives of the law and even against the Canadian Constitutional. You go on to say that this passage should be withdrawn. You talked about Quebec's experience. When you said that these amendments would enable to make it possible to avoid endless litigation and achieve the true objectives of the Pay Equity Act. Could you explain how this would happen? Thank you for your question, Mr. Fergus. Yes, the real objective of this legislation is described by Justice Abella, who I quoted from. That's to restore justice, to enable women to be paid what they should be paid, what they deserve to be paid, in comparison to their male counterparts that are doing the same job. But you have to look at the methodology. We know it's very difficult to do this. And this bill is a good bill in this respect because we're able to achieve some progress. But I go back to Clause 2. The Clause 2 has no place there. This is a concept that is foreign to pay equity. Pay equity legislation is designed to restore justice, to put an end to discrimination. And the Constitution states that people have to be protected against discrimination, and that includes women. So this clause about the diverse needs of employers has nothing to do with this. This Pay Equity Act is made for employees, and employers don't need protection. Employees need protection. So we're adopting legislation to protect them and to restore justice, pay equity as quickly as possible, and done in a proper fashion, in a satisfactory manner. And putting this in Clause 2 is contrary to the principle. That also means that, I'm speaking with my lawyer's hat on, but if you when you interpret legislation and you look at this Clause 2, which is under the title objective, we have the impression this applies to the entire Act. And by doing this, you're polluting this piece of legislation that's designed to protect people, and this clause could be used to reduce workers' rights, and that's contrary to the Constitution. And this was said by the Supreme Court of Canada back in May with respect to the Quebec legislation. Do I have time for another short question? Mr. Hines, I would imagine that your opinion would not be exactly like the one we just heard from Mr. Lacoste, so I'd like to hear your views.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to this issue. I'm concerned about potentially over-dramatizing this clause and making some strong assumptions that this clause will automatically end up at the Supreme Court of Canada. I think what the government is trying to accomplish in this clause is not to prohibit females from being paid equitably. I think what this clause recognizes is that there is a diversity in the employer community, and what we're trying to strive for in the presentations we put forward is flexibility in the way that this is delivered, not on the outcome, but in the mechanisms, in the mechanics of actually doing this within organizations that are large and complex and are not all the same. So when we think about things like defining what constitutes the establishment, when we think about things like access to short-term, highly skilled and what is largely very expensive labor, the use of comparators, internal versus external. The point we've been making all along around this desire for some flexibility is an allowance that would give employers within the construct of the Act a way of achieving the same outcome, but maybe not using the exact same mechanics to get there. I don't think this clause necessarily dilutes the entire Act. I don't think this necessarily takes us directly to the Supreme Court. I challenge those assumptions.
We'll either leave it there. Before we go to the 5-minute round, starting with Mr. Poilievre, members have a budget before them, which is to do the study we're doing. I will read it out. Study Bill C-86, a second act to implement certain provisions of the budget tabled in Parliament on February 27, 2018, and other measures. and the amount of money requested basically for witnesses to attend the hearings we've already pretty near completed is for $30,100. So do I have a motion to that effect? Moved, Mr. Julian.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, just a quick question. How much has been expended to date with the witnesses that we have scheduled or the witnesses that have already come before us?
I'm not sure on that amount. As you see on there, it would be normally on these kind of expenditures, as you can see, we're talking persons from Yellowknife, Toronto, Calgary, Vancouver, Montreal, Halifax, Winnipeg, Regina, and others, and video conference. Normally, the amount requested for in the study is more than we'll need, and we won't spend that $30,000. So it doesn't answer your question directly in terms of what we spent, because I really don't know.
And for instance, we've only had one video conference, and we don't think we'll have another one. So that's just an example of we've planned for 4, we've only had 1. So this is all going to go back to the global envelope of committees.
Unless the committee changes its mind about witnesses and requires more witness study, which I believe we'll be considering at our next meeting.
Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. On division. To 5-minute rounds, Mr. Polyev.
Dr. Hanna, you suggested that governments need to take action to mitigate the damage that free trade, in your view, causes to women. I found that approach rather surprising, given that the data points in the opposite direction. In countries where there is more free trade, women, minorities, and the less fortunate are all significantly better off than in countries where there is limited trade. For example, the highest life expectancy in the world for women, according to the World Bank, looking at a document entitled Life Expectancy at Birth Female Years, is incredibly Hong Kong, a place with among the highest population density on planet Earth, with no natural resources whatsoever. They even have to import their own water, where you have, in a space that is a fraction of the size of the city of Ottawa, 8 million people clustered and sharing space. The female life expectancy is 87 years old. And what is interesting is that for men, it's only 81 years old. So in terms of inequality between the sexes, we see that women are actually better off in this jurisdiction in terms of life expectancy than in other places. And Hong Kong, of course, is the freest economy in the world, has the most free trade, has almost no tariff barriers whatsoever, almost no quotas, a very limited and simplified tax regime. I don't just point to this example of the top 10 countries in life expectancy for women: Hong Kong, Japan, Macau, being a jurisdiction within China, Spain, France, South Korea, Bermuda, Singapore, and Switzerland. All of them are actually free trading nations, and almost all of them are free market economies. So I'm wondering why it is you seem to think that free markets and free trade are bad for women when, at least when it comes to life expectancy, the data demonstrates precisely the opposite.
Okay. Thank you for the question. I think you've misunderstood me. So I'm not making a normative or a blanket statement about the benefits, the virtues, or the dangers of free trade. Sometimes free trade does very good things for people. Sometimes free trade lifts people out of poverty. Sometimes free trade empowers women economically. Sometimes it closes the gender inequality gap. But sometimes free trade has adverse consequences. So the point I'm trying to make today is that we need better data about the circumstances under which free trade has adverse consequences, and we need a strategy for mitigating what those consequences might be. The other point that I'd like to caution is against the tendency to talk about women as economic actors only, right? So women are certainly economic actors. Women are workers, women are consumers, but women are also carers. Women are engaged in formal economies. Women are working in informal economies. We don't have good data about how trade liberalization impacts women in informal economies and how it impacts their work they do in the home. It's an indisputable fact that an overwhelming amount of social reproductive labor falls on the shoulders of women. And so we need studies, we need data about how free trade, how services liberalization, for example, impacts social reproductive labor that takes place in the home.
But if our goal is to end poverty, shouldn't our goal then be to open free markets? That seems to be what has ended poverty for hundreds upon hundreds of millions of people. You look, for example, to China, where in the late 1970s, the government represented 100% of GDP. And that led, of course, to the biggest famine in the history of humankind. Since that time, the share of the Chinese economy represented by government has dropped to about 33%. Stock markets and private property have been legalized, and the government has allowed free enterprise zones. And as a result, approximately 800 million people in 35, 40 years have been lifted out of extreme poverty into the middle class. So if our goal is to end extreme poverty, which we all agree falls disproportionately on women, then ought we not to be promoting free markets and free trade?
So I'm not making a statement about whether free trade lifts people out of poverty. Sometimes it has the potential to do that. Free trade has the potential to do lots of good stuff. But we need to make sure that governments have appropriate regulatory powers to protect their citizens when bad things happen, when there are import surges, when there are price fluctuations, when there are unexpected consequences that come along with more open markets. So to give you, some concrete examples, there are explicit carve-outs already in existing trade agreements that are tools available to governments to protect human life, plant life, the natural environment, and so on. I think there should be also explicit carve-outs available to, promote gender equality if a government so chooses. So please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that there is no potential for free trade to have a positive impact on poverty. In fact, I would make the opposite argument. But we need better policy. And to have better policy, we need better data, and we need better collaboration with our trade partners and with the international organizations with which we belong. So, of course, a major priority of the current government is women's economic empowerment. That's only a very small part of the story that I think is important. But the work that we're doing on women's economic empowerment needs to look at a bigger picture of who the women we seek to empower are.
We'll let it end it there. That's a really interesting discussion. Ms. Rudd.
A very interesting discussion, and thank you all for coming today. I just want to, for your information, the record, my colleague, Mr. Julian, brought up the few days there is left for you to make your submissions. I'd just like confirmation from the clerk. I believe it's November 15th. Is that correct? So you have till November 15th. So it's not tomorrow. You have till midweek next week. I want to, there's a couple of things. First of all, I want to follow up on Mr. Poilievre's comments about poverty and the goal of moving people out of poverty and into the middle class. And as you know, our government's done a number of things, and I think it flows back to you, Ms. Hanna, on your comment about data. So whether it's the Canada Child Benefit, the increase to GIS for vulnerable seniors, the Canada Workers Benefit, and as I listened to Mr. Lee and talked about eliminating the deficits, I wonder where he cut. And I guess one of the things that helps governments decide where to put those resources is data. And it's one of the things that we certainly had, when we came into government, recognized as something that we needed to improve. As you know, the long-form census was cut. Now it's back. It's helpful, but it's going to take time to build that data set again. Can you give us some suggestions about where you think the most sort of useful direction for, you mentioned some studies and other things, where you think that data might best come from? and maybe where you think it should be focused on?
So very recently I was at the World Trade Organization Public Forum, and so the gender and trade agenda was a big theme, but Canada's chief economist was on a panel precisely on this issue, talking about data. And one of the things that she said was, like, one of the best things and the farthest thing from which we are right now is to having these big sets of panel data at the individual level, right? That could be tracked over a long time to see, what are the long-term impacts on not just households but individuals within households. That's blue sky thinking, I think, at this point. But some of the funding that's included in the budget could go some distance to meeting those aspirations. And I said earlier, Canada's not in this alone. We're not the only country that's trying to do this. The Gender and Trade Unit from the UK was just here last week talking with the Ministry for Trade Diversification, again, precisely on this issue, because everyone's trying to get this right. Similarly, international organizations, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development is also trying to get this right. They've developed something called a gender toolbox, which is studying precisely this, the impact of potential free trade agreements on countries. And in that case, it's only been tested in West Africa. So it's looked at the Economic Partnership Agreement between the European Union and the East African community to see what would be the impacts. I have a host of criticisms about that because it's focused only on the formal economy, it's only focused on women as economic actors, and so on, right? But everyone's sort of groping around in the dark on this issue, right? So I unfortunately don't have the answers except to say that there needs to be, a multidimensional approach. Like I said to your colleague, I think we need to think about employment and wages, certainly, but also consumption, impacts on consumption and public services. But also we need to start thinking beyond women entrepreneurs and women as economic actors, and instead think about the multiplicity of roles that women play in the economy.
Holistic approach, if you will.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. How much time do I have left, Mr. Chair?
For a minute.
Little one. Mr. Hines, I want to give you an opportunity. I was listening carefully. Mr. Julian asked you a question and then went to someone else. Would you like to continue that thought?
Yeah, that was around, I think that was around flexibility. And,
correct.
Yeah, so some of the concerns that have been raised in front of this committee over the past week are around the whole issue of acknowledging the diverse needs of the employer community and flexibility within the system. And certainly that is something that we have long advocated for within the context of being supportive of the concept of pay equity. And I think the government, to its credit, acknowledged this with that clause and with a clause further in the bill around the minister's authority to create some exceptions and some exemptions. So what we're not advocating for is an ability to get around responsibilities, but an ability to create the mechanics within the system that work in a respective organization, acknowledging that not all organizations are the same.
Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Lee, thank you very much for being here today. Can you just give a basic lesson on where government gets its borrowed money?
Okay. Wasn't expecting that. I don't want to go deep into the weeds, but without getting into things like monetizing the debt and that sort of thing, governments borrow their money although they don't have to. I'm talking federal governments, sovereign governments with a printing press called a central bank. So I'm not even including countries in the European Union like Greece that doesn't have its own central bank anymore. I'm referring to countries like Canada, UK, Japan.
Just generally speaking, an average usual year.
We're talking sovereign lender, borrowers, governments, not subnational governments, because they don't have...
You got it. Government of Canada, how does it borrow money?
Government of Canada raises money in the bond markets.
So it sells bonds?
It sells bonds in the capital markets and to pension funds, to hedge funds, to wealth funds, and so forth. But there's money in the real economy that's being paid for those bonds. They're not being printed, as I use the phrase colloquially. It's not being monetized.
Hedge funds, wealth funds. So you have to have wealth then to buy these bonds.
Somebody has to have the money to pay for those bonds, yes.
Right. So
not someone like me, someone who's wealthy.
Someone who's wealthy.
Yes.
So we owe the debt to wealthy people.
Or corporations or investors.
Or corporations or investors, probably all wealthy also. And do working class people pay interest on that debt when they send tax dollars to Ottawa?
Well, certainly the government does pay interest on the debt.
And does that include working class people who pay taxes?
Anyone who's paying taxes, for sure.
The reason I'm curious about this is because the people who advocate deficits all the time are also the same people who claim with hand on heart, they're so concerned about the gap between rich and poor. But they don't seem at all concerned about taking tax dollars from working class and poor people and giving it to wealthy people in the form of higher interest on national debt. Does this strike you at all ironic?
I see where you're going. That isn't my concern, if you're asking me that. I have different intellectual, analytical concerns because, I mean, those people are also, those wealthy corporations or individuals have to, of course, pay taxes, annual file tax returns, and, of course, they pay personal income taxes or corporate income taxes on those revenues or on their net taxable income.
Right.
So it does come back in the full in the circular flow.
So those people who are worried about social justice and the separation between rich and poor ought to start thinking about why we force the working poor, the working class, to give of their money so that extremely wealthy people can get guaranteed returns on their investment in the Government of Canada.
If we're having a conversation, I think we are, a back and forth conversation. I understand your point, but that wouldn't be my principal argument. My principal argument is that when times get tough and we have to make adjustments, fiscal interventions, as I called the 1995 Chrétien decision, which I strongly supported, or the monetary interventions of the early 80s by Paul Volcker and the Bank of Canada in Canada, it falls disproportionately on low-income people and minorities. So they're the ones who pay the burden of the adjustment because they have less resources and less wealth and less resilience.
Right.
So they're the people who pay the price.
So in the lead up to that crisis, working class people are shoveling more and more money to the wealthy who can afford government bonds. And then when the crisis actually hits, then again, those working class and poor people are the people who suffer the most as a result of the adjustments that are needed to save the country from
because
bankruptcy.
Of cutbacks in programs, because of layoffs of people who are employed, that sort of thing.
So in light of these,
that's where the adjustment falls.
In light of these facts, maybe it's time we look upon with just a little bit more suspicion those people who tell us that they're concerned about income inequality and poverty and propose as their solution to it borrowing more money from wealthy corporations and powerful individuals.
Again, I see your point, and just to continue this quick back and forth, I was trying to impress today on the parliamentarians here, every one of you, that this is not just a theoretical debate. It's going to fall on your desk on the day that that province or one of those provinces contacts the Government of Canada for financial assistance because they are no longer able to pay their bills as they become due, and it'll be probably health care bills because they're about 50% of provincial spending in every provincial jurisdiction. So it's not going to be theoretical. It's going to fall on the desk of every member of Parliament and senator when that day arrives, and it's not in a 50 or 100 years.
As the witnesses can see, we have some wide-ranging discussions in this committee from time to time, but that was a good one as well. Mr. Sabera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome, everyone. Bienvenue ce matin. Looking at the PI legislation, we've heard some commentary, and some really good commentary, on the changes to the Labour Code. This is the first time in a generation, or maybe two generations actually, so 2 generations, that we've made, a government has made substantive and what I would call well-needed, well-required changes to Labour Code. But as Derek commented, we need to be careful. I don't want to mispronounce your last name, that's why I called you by your first name, excuse me. We need to be careful because we need to ensure competitiveness of our industries, whether they are federally regulated rail carriers or telecoms or banks. And we also need to be fiscally prudent because the folks working for the federal government are paid by an individual called the taxpayer. and we need to be prudent about that. And I believe we've struck a good balance on those measures. You can haggle about some of the details or some of the measures, but I think all in all we've struck a really good balance, and I think we need to be proud for that. I do want to turn to the Teamsters, because there is an issue that I've spoken with you about Unifor as well, on contract flipping, contract retendering, which is basically outlawed in the UK and in several other jurisdictions. What else is needed in this legislation to make sure we can not be in a situation where workers' rights are basically stripped away?
Thank you, and for the question. I think the first comment is that, to be very clear, Part 3 of the Labour Code will not affect FETCO too much, because most of the large federal employers are unionized, and Part 3 of the Labour Code really deals with bedrock base level, non-union, and there are provisions in the code, and we do welcome the changes. Funny enough, I happen to work during that Arthur's Commission looking at that. It's really long overdue, and we thank the government for bringing them. The contract flipping issue it will be a Part 1 of the Labour Code amendment. It is sorely needed. It disrupts life. It makes business less efficient. It's not really appropriate. The one I want to turn to make things better would be the scheduling issue. Scheduling is something that affects transportation workers. There are people who drive trains, buses, pilots. People actually move the stuff. Because of a subrogation agreement with Labour Canada, Transport Canada sets those hours. So notwithstanding the clause that says this doesn't apply to collective agreements, it wouldn't apply anyway. So when I talk about fatigue, the major issue is this. We know from science the workers who work these hours have cognitive damage, disease, social consequences that Transport Canada can't look at because their mandate is an efficient system, public safety for companies. So this is something that has to be fixed.
Okay, thank you, because I do want to move on, because there are some other folks that I'd like to get to. UFCW, one of my siblings, is a member of the union and has been a member of the union since for a long time, I think over 35 years. And the industry has changed. The grocery industry, if I can speak to that, has changed in Canada drastically. And we would need, we've led on the federal side with legislation on changes to the Canada Labour Code. Unfortunately, in the province of Ontario, under Premier Ford, he has basically come in and really stripped away the rights that workers earned and deserve in the last changes that he's made as his government, and it's really unfortunate to see. And I do need to make that point, because it's really taking workers' rights back in time, not forward, which we should be doing, and that's the way we should build Canada, not the way that his government is doing. I will turn to Mr. Lee. Ian, I've always enjoyed your presentations here on committee. I've been on the committee since the beginning of our government. We live in a really, I would say, wonderful world. We have the best of all worlds and sometimes the worst of all worlds. Global poverty is at record lows. Poverty in Canada has been trending down since the 1960s with the introduction of old age security, healthcare, GIS. We've brought in the Canada Child Benefit. We've done a lot of measures, increased the 10% GIS, and trade. I actually agree with Mr. Poilievre to a certain extent. Trade tends to lift all boats. There are some losers, but it is something in this world that has reduced global poverty to what I would say are continuing lower levels. One thing I wanted to ask you is what do you think of our government's trade agenda? And then we'll move on to the debt and deficit numbers afterwards. Okay?
I've actually strongly endorsed it. I mean, you've closed the deal on CETA. It was negotiated by the Conservatives, but you closed it. That's an extremely important deal. 500 million high-income consumers. For those in unions who say we shouldn't be negotiating with middle-income or low-income countries, to use the World Bank typology. And so that was an important step forward. The TPP was an important step forward because over half of the world is towards Asia Pacific now in terms of GDP and the opportunities. The new NAFTA, as I like to call it, the acronym is just too difficult for my old brain to remember, so I'll call it the new NAFTA. It's yet to be determined. We don't even know what the new Congress is going to do, and I do think it's a 50-50 proposition at best, so we won't, maybe in a month from now, the new Congress will have defeated it because the Democrats want to poke Mr. Trump in the eye. We don't yet know, because she has not actually commented specifically and concretely on that. So yet to be determined. It might turn out to be a blessing in disguise if they repudiate it, because then we can get the tariffs off. That to answer your question directly, my one criticism is the fact that the tariffs are still on, and tariffs to anyone who looks at trade are absolutely pernicious and destructive and negative. I don't see any justification whatsoever for tariffs. The whole point of GATT at the end of the Second World War was to get rid of tariffs, and then it continued under WTO, and yet here we are 70 years later still talking about tariffs that we all know, every economist knows, doesn't do anything good.
Mr. Lee, I'll wrap it up. Thank you.
Mr. Lee, Mr. Cepero, 3 minutes to Julian, and then we'll have a quick question from Mr. McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just want to get back to the amendments. Ms. Rudd, my colleague, made an intervention that was simply not correct. In 7 days to the hour, all of the amendments need to be submitted through an opposition party, or if the government accepts any amendments to submit themselves, they're not actually obliged to adopt those amendments. But in 7 days to the hour. Now, we have a stat holiday next Monday. It takes 2 to 3 days to do the interpretation, to the translation, and to finalize those amendments. So we're really talking about hearing back from you by tomorrow afternoon. That's the reality around the process that it takes for amendments. The government to pretend that there's all this time is simply false. They rammed this legislation through. They put the handcuffs on consideration of this bill. And so I'm going to leave you with my home phone number because I'm leaving for British Columbia tonight. It's 604-521-2171. That's 604-521-2171. Phone me anytime this weekend. We will be endeavoring to put these amendments in. We are hoping the government actually turns away from the cliff, allows amendments to pay equity, allows amendments around banking and consumer protection, allows the consideration of the important message that you have delivered about this bill and the flaws that must be corrected. So please contact my office because we want to work with you and so many of the other witnesses that have come forward with very valuable proposals for amendments that will make a difference in the legislation. This is badly flawed legislation being rammed through the House in a way that even Stephen Harper never tried to do. It is beyond me that a Prime Minister who promised to bring an end to these undemocratic practices is exactly accelerating, amplifying, doing even worse than what the previous government did. Now, it's not just amendments that need to be considered. It's also we can choose to delete clauses. And I wanted to come back again to Mr. Lacoste and Mr. Hennessy. Clause 181, the Pay Equity Act, is basically the scissors clause. It allows the current government or any future government to cut out whole sectors. They can decide, the minister just on fiat, can decide to exempt the entire banking sector from any provision of the Pay Equity Act. Basically exclude women working in that sector from pay equity. Would you recommend to this committee that that scissors clause that allows the minister and in this government or any future government to exempt whole sectors, whole industries, that be cut out of this legislation? Would you recommend that that be deleted?
For UFCW Canada, yes, we would recommend that it be deleted.
La même chose pour nous, bien entendu.
Same thing applies to us, obviously.
Quick question, Ms. Rudd, because we do have a 10:45 hard stop.
Thank you. And thank you. My question is to Mr. Allen and Ms. Passmore. Earlier this week, we had the minister in to talk about the BIA and some of the elements within it that we've talked about today. And I come from a rural riding where over 40% of my population is over the age of 55. And the measures around the consumer protection framework, the banking particularly, especially where we have small towns, where the banks are closing, the complication that comes into banking, seniors particularly find it distressful, or stressful rather. Do you have any sort of information or comment on the particular, this particular element as it relates to seniors?
I would say that older Canadians can be vulnerable consumers, and strictly relying on disclosure and consent as a way to protect those consumers would not, given the complexity of a lot of financial products, not be adequate. And therefore, the appropriate standard is a step in the right direction. And I would also add that banks can play a very important role in recognizing loss of capacity and potential elder financial abuse issues. Fair Canada has co-authored a report with the Canadian Centre for Elder Law on vulnerable investors, and we made 6 practical recommendations, including amending the privacy legislation federally to permit workers and employees and different staff at banks to play a positive role in dealing with that problem.
Okay, with that, we will have to conclude. I want to thank each and every one of you for coming forward to make your presentations and answer our questions. Meeting adjourned.